at the world, my love. The old order is falling away. The unthinkable is becoming thinkable. No, this is our chance to make a difference.
Fine, go ahead and try.
But no. I cannot do this without you. After all, who am I but you, my darling? You are Mona Ewell, jewel of the Norwegian Foreign Service, who possesses the most beautiful, powerful Rolodex. Let us try, my love. Together.
Tell me you would have said no.
Incredible playwright right here.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Sir, congratulations on your new play, nominated for many awards.
Yeah, 7 Tony nominations. I just want to say that out loud because it still feels a little surreal. And also, we're here in the Tower Records building where I used to spend my childhood hunting for CDs I could afford. So that's pretty cool.
You were born and raised New Yorker?
I was not born here, but I started coming here and living here when I was 9 in this neighborhood when it was very different.
Can I ask, do you still have physical pieces of music? Do you still collect music of any kind, or are you an MP3?
Do, you know, it's funny, I just started...
MP3, sorry, that's like 10 years
that's
ago.
That's like, I didn't know
Streaming
that.
music, yeah.
No, I'm like everyone, I stream, but at the same time, sometimes I'm just frozen by, you know, I could listen to any song in the history of the world. What do I want? 2 hours go by. So actually in my car, when I drive around, I now have like just found all the old CDs, old meaning some of them like 10 years old, some are, and I just throw them in the back, and then somehow like that I'm limited, that I can only pick, I find myself actually listening to more music and stuff that I completely forgot that
I started collecting records simply for that reason, to have like a set collection of music that I love that I would just go to that.
But it's amazing to be sitting in the kitchen like, oh, what was that Bob Dylan track that was in the B-side of 200 years ago? Oh, and it just comes on, you know.
Everything's way too easy for people.
Yeah, amazing.
You have to dig and go to Tower Records and talk to an annoying retail associate.
Yes, who would shame you at your ignorance. Yeah.
Take me back. So this play is a number of years in the making, 2-3 years in the making, right? You had a chance encounter with the actual people who are doing this in the back.
Yeah, I work a lot at Lincoln Center Theater uptown, which is an extraordinary place to work. And my last play was done there called Blood and Gifts, and it was about spies in the Soviet-Afghan war. And I brought all these actual spies in to come and meet and talk to the actors about what it was like to, you know, be a spy on the ground.
Members of the deep state.
Yeah. I think they didn't know that's what they were called back then, but like really fascinating people. And then my director, Bart Shearer, brought in this rather famous, fascinating diplomat called Tyrod Larson, who was at the UN right then, sort of brokering peace deals in the Middle East. And he was amazing, and he had these incredibly beautiful, sexy shoes. There's a joke in the play about his beautiful, sexy shoes, his little tip to that first encounter. And he was very kind and loved the play, and he knew Bart through Bart's children and his wife, Mona Ewell, who is now currently the Norwegian ambassador to the UK. And so he and I went out for drinks at Bart's suggestion at P.J. Clark's, this awesome watering hole across from Lincoln Center. So this is the origin story, as it were, of the play. And we started talking, and we had a round, and we had another round, and I started to realize that this man across from me was the creator of a secret back channel that allowed the Oslo Accords to happen 20 plus years ago. And I was a little embarrassed because, you know, I grew up and still I follow politics like people follow sports. And I thought the Americans worked out the Oslo Accords. I mean, I'm embarrassed to even say that. And
you have so many great one-liners about how the Americans wouldn't be able to work out the Oslo Accords in the first act. I love it.
So, you know, I'm hearing these little fragments of, oh yes, and there was secret meetings, and we were renting Hertz rental cars and into the mountains of Norway, and the Palestinian Liberation Organization, which was seen as terrorists by the American government, was sneaking in, and everyone was drinking Johnny Walker Black, and I was like, now that is my wheelhouse. And when I was talking to the actors, and we were rehearsing the play, trying to, you know, you're always trying to give context, I would say just a few months ago when we were first doing the production off Broadway, I'd say, look, you need to understand the stakes that we're talking about. These people are secretly flying here. It's against the rules. The people who are organizing are two, in the larger diplomatic world, nobodies, 30, 40-year-old nobodies who hatched an insane idea. It would be like two people working at the State Department that barely have a pass, coming up with the idea in the early 2000s to get Al-Qaeda and Dick Cheney's office to secretly meet in Norway and drink booze together. That's what we're talking about. That's how crazy this was. And the risk, the extraordinary risk that these people, these Norwegians, but more the Palestinians and the Israelis, they took to sit across from the person often that was their mortal enemy, that they thought they were so divided, they'd never actually sat across from the other. Like, the people from the Palestinian Liberation Organization had never physically seen an Israeli citizen before. And here they are sitting across from them, terrified. They have the courage to acknowledge that you have a point of view, which I completely disagree with. We're not going to talk about the past. We're just going to talk about the future. And the question that was so fascinating for me, that sort of took me into the play, was what would it be like to have the courage to sit across from your enemy and to see that enemy as a human being, and then the unexpected thing is that you are the one that is changed. And that, to me, was worthy of writing a play about.
Absolutely. Now, talk to me about the process of crafting this play. The play now, at the moment, is 2 hours and 55 minutes. There's 2 intermissions.
2 hours and 54.
But it moves along at an incredible pace. It is thrilling to watch, and I think a lot of that has to do with your language and how well you write the characters, but also how you consistently raise the stakes and how you sort of push it very quickly. You push every scene as quick as possible.
Well, to get wonky for a second, I mean, the two models for building the play were a thriller. In essence, it's, as Bart, my director and partner, has called it, which I think is quite sharp and spot on, as an intellectual thriller, stress on the thriller. But also, and because we did the play in the thrust, and the thrust is a kind of stage that instead of the flat proscenium, that it's a sort of semicircle. And what's fascinating about it is people can get in and out of a thrust with such speed that you, the author, realize, and I wrote the play for this space, that you can jump cut like a movie in a way that you can't normally do. So it was really liberating. And the other thing is Shakespeare. And the crazy thing is Shakespeare invented the jump cut. Movies are just following what Shakespeare did. So I'm taking the Shakespearean jump cuts, and I'm also taking the Shakespearean model of a history play, where the stakes keep rising, and every time something is achieved, someone with more stature arrives, and the prince arrives, and the duke arrives, and then the king arrives. So, if you're going to steal from the best. But it was a process of sort of figuring out, how do you take all this information and make it entertaining so that the audience is, whether you're learning things or not, is fantastic. But my job is to entertain you on a deep level. I don't mean in a facile way, but to say, these are the questions that I'm still wrestling with and I think are amazing. I hope that you find them interesting too.
How difficult is the process for you to find the entertainment in the midst of all the research that you're doing, all the stories that you're hearing? Because then there's the process of cutting, reworking, dramatizing, and there's probably stories that you heard that you absolutely love that either didn't fit in the play or needed to be reworked to fit in the play.
Well, I mean, like all dramatists at our heart, we're all sort of comic whores. I mean, Arthur Miller loved a pretty good joke. But in this case, so you're always looking for that. But in this case, the actual outline of the real events is so strange and odd that it sort of lent itself to sort of the funny, crazy stuff. There's a moment in the play when Mona Ewell, the lead, turns to the audience and says, "You can't make these things up." And sort of some of the craziest stuff in the play that you saw actually happened. I might have moved it around and tightened it, but the other element of that is that you can't. I mean, you can't put everything in a play, and there are so many. I mean, Bart, the director, and I will sit around last night. We're having a drink late night and going, "Remember that scene we had to cut? God, I missed that scene." But 2 hours and 55 minutes feels like 2 hours, which is the thing I'm most proud of. But it's still 2 hours and 55 minutes. I mean, when we first opened this play with a 300-person audience, it was 3 hours and 37 minutes. Wow. And 3 weeks before the press came, I cut 35 or 37 minutes out of the play.
What was that like? What is that process for you? How do you do it?
You literally watch the play, and every night you go, okay, I have to take out 3 minutes. There's a gun to my head. What 3 minutes can go without destroying the play? And the audience teaches you. You as the author, your job is to sit in the back and watch the audience watch the play.
Is it in many ways instinctual? Like,
yes.
Sidney Lumet always said when he was making movies that he knew when a performance was bad because he got bored, or he knew when to cut something because he got bored.
Yes, I think, and I don't mean this vainly, but what was fascinating in this case was those scenes got cut in all the workshops and writing I did. Once we got in for an audience, we had 3 hours and 37 minutes where there was no fat. And I don't mean that like, oh, I'm so special, but it's such a complicated story that you could arguably do it. And in some ways, it was even more powerful, but you can't do 3:37 on a Wednesday matinee and a Wednesday evening. For the actors, they would die.
Your actors are
incredible. They're the greatest cast that I've ever worked with, and I've worked with casts throughout the National Theatre of London, Lincoln Center, Roundabout, around the world. And it's not a comment on those other casts. It's just pound for pound. No, I mean, really, 17 actors in this play that all of them could be, you know, playing Hamlet, so to speak. It's incredible. So you have all this, you know, gristle and meat, as it were, and you go, all right, but if I had to cut it, what are the things? And then it becomes like music. You think, where is it quieter when it doesn't need to be quiet? I mean, the thing about playwriting is it's more like musical composition than being a prose writer. And it's different from screenwriting in that way, in that you literally, the metronome of the human voice is the engine of the play, and the sort of, you're scoring the soundtrack in a way, just as you with the words. And sometimes you're like, oh, it's a little legato here. Oh, it's a little, you know, this, it's a little that. And the audience watching the play, sometimes it's, you know, in some ways it's great when the audience is bored, you easily know what to cut. And sometimes it's like, if I want this idea to be wicked clear to the audience, how can I cut the things around it so it just lifts and the audience goes, oh, that's what that guy wants. Now I'm interested in following what that guy wants.
Right. How often is that your motivation? I mean, they say that that's the major motivation of all drama, is what someone wants. Do you go into every scene plotting out what each character wants, especially with something like this, where there is a sort of grand sort of objective for the end of the play?
Well, I think some of it is instinctual. Sometimes you literally plot it out with the old screenwriting 3x5 card, which is a vastly underrated way of working, you know, just to keep your mind and you're structured. But some of it is, you know, you just, like any task, you do it for a long time, hitting the famous 10,000-hour rule, you know, about baseball. There comes a point where you've written long enough that you're always getting better, you're always revising, you're always being humbled by the process. But you do have an instinctive ability to leap over certain steps, and you sort of know, if I'm even going to start writing this scene, I know that I have to start in the middle of the scene, and I know that the needs must be desperate on everyone's part. I mean, everybody... Lanford Wilson, the late great American playwright, once said to me that you never give a character anything, make them fight for it. And what we want to watch, whether it's a monosyllabic play where people are just sort of grunting and not speaking about, or whether it's sort of a hyperverbal play, which my work would fall into, people must need, they must, you know, it must be what an old acting teacher of mine called the death factor. What is the literal, actual life and death stakes? And in this play, the actual story is very helpful because these people were risking their lives, and they feel like they're holding their entire people on their shoulders when they're sitting across from the enemy or the adversary. That, you know, what you're watching in this play is people strangers who are life and death enemies, going to be intimate friends who are still in real life, speak to each other once a week, and their children are bonded. I mean, that's kind of extraordinary, and certainly in the political times we're living in now.
Yeah, talk about that. Talk about how the play has changed in regards to the political times that we're living in now. And not in the sense that you've rewritten or changed anything in it, but the life that the play takes on.
Well, we did this play downstairs in the Mitzi Newhouse, which is this beautiful 300-seat theater in Lincoln Center, which, for all intents and purposes, it is a Broadway house for a living American playwright, because living American plays rarely ever make it to quote-unquote Broadway. So you think that's the peak that you get, and it's magic. And this is my second show there, and it's intimate, and you know that we sold out, and the audiences loved it. But as they're watching the play, you're seeing them sucked into a foreign story about foreigners and a foreign conflict that they're moved by and get emotionally excited about, but it's still about the other. 6 months goes by between we close off Broadway and we can get everyone organized schedule-wise to reopen on Broadway in a 1,000-seat house in the upstairs in the Vivian Beaumont. And Brexit happens, the American presidential election happens, and up until a couple days ago, the presidency of France almost went a different way, shall we say. And all of a sudden, without changing a word, I mean, I changed lots, but it was just for getting actors on and off stage faster in a larger theater. Those are the changes. The changes were nothing. There's no political rewrites. There was no new speeches, nothing. All of a sudden, the play is profoundly different, and I'm watching 1,000 people a night watch a play that they think is about the United States of America. And now Israel-Palestine is Democrats and Republicans. And you feel this, you can physically see a thought balloon collectively rising in the audience in the middle of Act One, saying, you know, in tin type across, if we're on screen, oh my God, are Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi, fill in the blank, Democrat, sitting in a back room drinking wild turkey, talking about their grandkids. Oh, please, Lord, I hope they are. And so you have I don't know about you, but I'm struggling as a citizen in the United States not to be overcome with rage and anger and animosity towards people who, not just politicians, but other American citizens whose political beliefs to me seem on the surface suicidal, vengeful, and wildly backward. And yet these are human beings who raise children or volunteer at their fire department or make a great flambe and can pick sushi, you know. Pick your humanistic trait. And so you're trying, you know, I'm trying to make work that allows me to be radically empathetic towards people that on the surface I wouldn't. So it's a constant sort of humbling process.
I'm going to go on a slight tangent here for a second, going off of what you just said. Do you feel sometimes, though, that when we talk about these people that we're trying to, these people, poor phrasing.
Right.
The people
our
that
fellow citizens.
Yeah, our fellow citizens that we're trying to empathize with, but whose politics we abhor or find nihilistic and suicidal at times, what a lot of times gets in the way is a lack of curiosity. They may be human beings, they may be volunteering at the fire department, but there is an incuriosity that leads to these kinds of nihilistic political impulses.
My gut response is all along what you're saying, but then the voice that always comes back to me is, it's, you know what's funny, is being a playwright, being a writer making upper of stories, is you always have this voice, and when you're writing, the voice always says, always be specific, don't generalize, Rogers, that's a rubbish BS scene, throw it out, don't generalize. And I find it's a slippery slope for me to fall in the trap of generalizing about them. Now listen, I've got people in my own extended family, I got people I meet that just make me apoplectic. But I also know people, everyone does, that are confoundingly don't subscribe to that complete definition of what you said. And here's the other thing, too. Here's the thing that keeps me up at night. What if they're right? What I don't like about the left, of which I include myself, is we just assume, like we assume that water must be drunk to survive. We assume that we're right about everything. Well, I can guarantee you one thing. We are not right about everything. History does not go down a line like that. You look at the most complicated issues in history that we now whitewash and make simple and say, oh, well, these people right, these people wrong. It is not how humanity works. It is not how civilization works. So on some key thing, you and I are completely gobsmackingly wrong. And our grandchildren will be like, those dudes were ridiculous. And that both keeps me up at night, but also reminds me to keep my rage in check.
Absolutely. Do you actually feel like the Democrats and the Republicans are as divided as the Israelis and the Palestinians in Oslo?
I think that still the stakes are much higher for them, so to speak, simply for the fact that we live in a vast nation, as crazily interconnected by technology, for better and ill, going back to our discussion about CDs versus, iTunes. But when you live in a part of the world, the entire world is watching Israel-Palestine, is invested in it with this sort of almost heroic or obsessive, depending on your point of view, degree. It is a tiny, tiny spot on a globe. And it is the mothership of all the Abrahamic faiths. So of course its importance historically is indescribable. But when you're there, you physically understand the oppressive nature of, we think this, people, you can on one hand never see a Palestinian and yet be 2 inches away from them. So what we have as Democrats and Republicans is we don't even have to see each other. We can live in 2,000 miles away from each other. So I think it's just a concentration there. Plus, to be quite frank, bloodletting and terror is on a scale that we have not, knock wood, experienced in this country. But I do think similarly, I think in Israel, what's happening in a weird way, the inner politics of the state of Israel is having an American moment, and vice versa. What you're saying about are they like us with Democrats versus Republicans? I think that's happening just in Israel itself, which is as traumatic for them as it is for us right now.
Going back to the play and your process as a writer, what was the most difficult scene for you to write? What was the hardest moment for you to write in the play?
The most difficult thing was less a scene than a track, to use casting terms, this kind of track for these parts, this parts. On paper, you would think the Norwegians would be the easiest because they're northern Westerners. They are, more connected to my people, so to speak, as we all. But the Israelis and Palestinians were much easier, or if not easier, not easy, but easier. The Norwegians, the characters were kind of elusive to me. What you want on stage is people that have literal or figurative, gender aside, cojones, that it's like, I want this, and you're mine, and ha ha ha, you know?
Who's neutral?
And but they're just like and people from the Middle East, to be wildly overgeneralizing and sweeping, wear their passion on their sleeves in a way that's great fun for a playwright. You know, the Norwegians as a people are much more. They're, you know, to use cricket terms, they're back foot. You know, they're back foot people. Well, Palestinians and most Americans are front foot. And so, how do you? And the leads of this play are back-footed Northern Europeans from a culture that doesn't like to put their head above the sand. So I mean, the performances by Jennifer Ely and Jennifer Mays are for the ages as the two Norwegian leads, Mona Juel and Terje Rad Larsen. But you know, they sort of lifted it for me. But it was tricky because you're trying to be true to the music. To go back to what I was saying earlier, the music of the story. But how do you create parts that are going to lead, you know, be the leads in a play that are not as vociferously out there as the other parts?
Are you still making changes on the play? Do you still go and watch and tinker?
I'm not making any script changes. I mean, I actually took out a couple lines to get ready to publish a British edition. But the director and I both will go back and sometimes say, hey, you know that scene? I think you'll get more purchase if you lift that word. You're dropping that word, and I think the audience you'll get a better laugh, or it'll help you go into the next scene. And some of it's just obsessive tinkering, and some of it is it's a live beast. I mean, the difference theater and film and television is it's literally different every night, word for word exactly the same, staging exactly the same, lights coming exactly the same time, and yet the alchemy of 1,000 people changes the play.
Well, I have a question about that, actually, because when I saw the play, the way that it starts is a couple characters slowly kind of creep onto the stage, and it seems like at one point it's almost stage managers, but then it's actually cast members, and the audience didn't know when to clap at the start of the play, which I love, because then all of a sudden the play starts and it's crackling, it's moving really fast, and you don't have this moment that sort of alerts you that like a play has begun, kind of.
Yeah, well, I have to give all credit to Bart Shearer.
So it was intentional that way.
It was. I mean, he's just truly. There's not a finer American theater director alive. But Bart, and I think he probably didn't even really know it. You know, like any artist, you're just intuitively doing things, and later you're like, oh, that's why I did that. But I think what he did, because it's such a huge play, and I'm asking, you know, the first act is the tricky act for the actor and the actors and the director, because they have all this information that the author needs to get them to download to the audience in an entertaining way. So when the second act starts, they understand all the weird machinations. You know, they've gotten their graduate degree in Middle Eastern history while laughing. You know, so what he wanted to do, I think, was to sort of take the audience and say, okay, cell phones off. Quiet now.
Yeah, it's a very calming, quiet way to start.
We're gonna, you know, we're passing through the veil, as it were. I thought it was very savvy. And
so you find with most performances that you've been to, people don't clap at the beginning, because there was one guy in my performance who's in the back.
I know. Well, you know, look, let's be honest. Jennifer Ely is a star, right? And she's a star because she should be a star. She's incomparable. So, but the funny thing is, in the theater, those of us who make theater, we hate the clapping before, because we all want to just start the pretend game, and it's flattering, and I'm sure, and again, this was not talked about with Jennifer, and now, you know, Jefferson's getting the same thing, so sometimes there is, you know, despite our best intentions, there's the applause, which is a compliment, as, you know, to them. So then we just started a little bit later, you know, the passing through the veil begins 3 seconds after.
I have that feeling as an audience member. I've never enjoyed the applause at the start of the play, or the applause when the big name actor comes walking out on stage.
I think, with rare exception, actors, no matter how famous they are, they just want to do the work. You know, they want to be pretend. They want to join you in pretending that they're not who they are and that they're the character. Otherwise, they would be doing something else with their lives.
Let's get some questions from the audience. Who is it right here?
Hey, JT, thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
I'm a playwright myself. I've got 2 full lengths under my belt. The last one I actually premiered last summer at Dixon Place.
Oh, cool.
And it was well received and everything. But every time I go back to read it, I hate reading it.
That's because you're a writer.
Exactly. And I'm at the point with it where I feel like it would be easier for me to just rewrite the whole play than to go back and actually like work on the things that are bothering me. So I guess my question is, what advice do you have?
Oh man, that's the mothership question right there. Well, here's my question, to give you hopefully a useful response, right? So my question for you is: why are you rewriting the play? What is driving you to rewrite the play? Is it that you don't feel it's finished, or because you want it to have another life, another production, or what?
So I feel like I'm explaining a lot to the audience, to the reader. I feel like it's more about I'm focusing a lot about like backstory and these characters and where they came from, instead of like what's actually happening in the moment between these people. So I feel like it drags because it's a lot of dialogue, but the dialogue doesn't always feel focused. So
Okay,
trying
so
to,
I'm going to
focus
give you a thought, which is and sort of wildly inappropriate because I've not read the play, but I'm going to give you the thought because this is a task I give myself every single draft of every play I ever do, and it's thrilling and slightly embarrassing how it never gets old. If you take your play and you take every scene in your play and you literally say, how late can I start the scene so the audience doesn't know what's going on but isn't completely confused? And with the same scene, how early can I end, earlier than I've ended, so there isn't an ending to the scene? And if you literally just say, it's okay, I can put it all back later. If you just red pen every single scene, whether it's 2 lines, 12 lines, 1 line, and then read it again, my experience is it's kind of amazing. Because the funny thing is, your job as a playwright, as a storyteller, like mine, is to give the audience as little information as possible so that they are not confoundingly lost. We don't want to know as an audience. Think about it. When you go to a movie or a play or a TV show, you like stuff when you're like, I don't really know what's... what is the greatest TV show ever made, in my humble opinion, is The Wire. There were whole scenes in The Wire. And I would turn... Can I curse on this? I would turn to my wife and like, what the fuck just happened?
The first season of The Wire, the first 8 episodes.
What the fuck just happened? And you want that, so... We feel that we have to explain everything to the audience. I do all the time. It's certainly one of my multiple Achilles heels. Can I have 3? No, 2 Achilles heels. So I don't know. Again, it's presumptuous of me, but it's a useful tool for me that I used on this play endlessly. Welcome.
It's sort of the age-old rule, right? Get in late and leave early.
Get in late, leave early. Yeah, it's a funny thing about writing for the stage, and this has some overlap with writing for film and television, is all these quote-unquote old rules, they're good rules. They're there for a reason. Great artists for centuries, in certain cases, use them. And, it's foolish not to master them or attempt to master them.
Next question.
Hi, thanks for being here. I was wondering, what kind of scenes that you wish you had in the play, but you had to cut out?
I cut out... I'm pausing only because... in describing them, I'm trying to how to describe it so a way that if you haven't seen the play, it makes sense.
Okay.
There were moments of arrival when the Israelis and Palestinians arrive in the weirdness of Norway that were sort of wonderful and funny, but we realized I didn't need. One of the things about a play. Okay, so what happened was, a play starts right, literally on page 1, line 1, but really, a play like a movie starts when the ball starts going down. I'm going to weirdly use a bowling metaphor. I don't bowl, but when the ball starts going down the lane. And so sometimes that lane throw begins on the first page, but in this play, it doesn't really begin until about page 20. Now, all this amazing, crazy stuff happens, but actually, in a weird way, the play doesn't start until they arrive secretly in Norway. So it became a moment where I realized that scenes that were really great, I think, vainly, but didn't radically propel the story in the first 20 pages had to go, because you look up from page 20, you're like, dude, there's a lot of pages to go here. These scenes, sort of the preparatory scenes that would be in a movie, and in fact, I'm making a film out of this play, and so it'll be interesting as I have a gut.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
It's fantastic.
Yeah, I have a gut feeling that a lot of things that I took out of the play will actually be in the film because they might be more interesting in visual language than they were in verbal language. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. It's more for like a film audience than for a theater audience.
It's not even for a film audience per se, but it's that it will be more dynamic visually.
Okay.
I think that there's certain kinds of stories or scenes or kinds of stories that just are more dynamic in a visual way as opposed to a verbal way. Vainly, I think the scenes were pretty good, but they could survive. The play could survive without them. I think they kind of have to be in the movie in a way. So, I'm being a little inarticulate because I'm in the middle of it, but it's sort of endlessly. The process of figuring out how to write something is like you just are constantly relearning, and it's sort of like, wow, I didn't know that's how it works. That's so cool. So I'm kind of in the middle of that right now.
And there's so many things that you can do in a film and vice versa in a play that sort of modulate and change how you tell the story. Like just in terms of performance, you can use a camera and a cut and a change of scenery or something to say something that you may have to say with words on the stage.
Yeah, they're just different. They're overlapping, but different medium. Yeah.
I think we have time for one more question.
Hi. So I'm curious about Bartlett Sher being the director of the show, because I've seen so many of his shows that he's directed, like King and I, Night in the Piazza, and I'm going to see My Fair Lady when it comes. So I'm curious because I'm so used to seeing him do such classic musicals that this is kind of like a departure in a way for him. So that for what I'm used to. So I'm curious as to what is it about him that you felt confident that he could bring your story to life?
Well, it's funny because Bart's a generation older than me, so he has an enormous body of work and a huge body of work before he came to New York as a director. And it's true, he's famous, he's iconic now as a director of new and classic musicals, but he's actually, a Leeds University English trained, deeply political artist. And I think he brings those politics to his musicals. That's why they're so bloody good, those productions. But kind of this is his red meat, And when we first started working together on my last play, Blood and Gifts, I'd done it already in the National Theater, but was doing a new production with Americans here, and he and I hadn't worked together. And he's the director I wanted to work with because I'd seen his work and thought it was amazing. And it was this sort of kismet moment of, oh, we're obsessed about the same things. So I think why he's great is he brings politics to musicals, and he brings musicals to plays. I mean, he staged this play like The King and I. It is staged like a musical. It is choreographed like a musical. You don't realize it when you're watching it. And as a choreographer of Bodies in Space, he's the greatest living director I know. And so I wrote it knowing that he might be the only dude that could pull this off. I mean, realizing how talented he was, I was like, well, I think a great way, I was like, I'm going to challenge you to something that you could barely do, like I'm going to challenge me to something I can barely do. And it did about kill us. It really, I mean, I think he said, it's the hardest thing I've ever done. It made doing a musical look like a walk in the park. But it is. I mean, he's a truly brilliant artist. And we're hopefully going to do a lot together. We have a whole series of projects. And it's always great when good work only happens when you work with the same people over and over again. So you have a language, you have a trust, you have your back, be it with actors, be it with directors, be it designers, be it with theaters. So, yeah, he's pretty cool.
When you're working with a director like that you've worked with before, and you know what he's good at and what you're great at and what you're both obsessed with, I'm curious, how much stage direction do you put in there for him? How much do you leave out?
Very little stage direction, not going back far before meeting with Bart. I think that the writer, two things. I think the writer needs to put the play in the dialogue. Now, there are terrific American writers that write epic arias describing down to the detail of the lederhosen, what people are wearing, and have stage directions that are like, and then the sky opens and 1,000 birds come out. I just don't do that. There's some great plays, though, that are written like that. I don't do that. I want it all in the words so the actors can interpret and they can come up with solutions that are more interesting than I thought. But literally, the attempt is that if you literally just said the words without moving on stage, without any quote-unquote staging, the play would work. And then anything else brought to it is just brings another layer. But the thing, honestly, I can't read stage directions. I literally I'm a bit like our president. I get 2 minutes and then I can't see. So when I read stage directions that are more than one sentence long, I'm like, what? So it's like, this is a problem I have, so I try to make it a virtue. But it's a serious problem that I have.
The play is absolutely incredible. Congratulations. Unfortunately, I have to let you go.
Yeah.
It's at Lincoln Center right now. How long is it going to be there?
We are running currently all the way deep into June, and God knows what the gods will say after that, but it's pretty thrilling.
Congratulations. J.T. Rogers, everybody. Thank
you so much, everyone.